started.
Good. So what I think you're saying is there is an argument modeling, there's a meta-argument modeling, and for example, the structure of equivalence is part of the meta-argument modeling. And you're saying, you're proposing to keep them separate.
So I think the meta-argument model is also just an argument model. It's the same.
Okay, good.
Like
so we agree on that, yes?
Yes, but what I disagree on, or I don't know whether we disagree, let's see what your opinion is on that, is that they should be tightly linked. For me, it's purely a reference. Like if you're arguing about something that's not encompassed in the original argument model, let's say equivalence, you want to say, hey, these two, oh, there's Timothy. If you want to say these two sentences are not equivalent, so they're not the same claim, that's something for me which is out of scope for an argument model. That does not mean that you can't model that discussion within an argument model. But if you do so, the only thing that I'm arguing for is that should probably be a separate argument map, and the only link between the original argument map where the equivalence is assumed and modeled, and the other one is maybe a link in one way or another. But there's there's
I see what you're saying now.
Okay, there's no formalization between the original argument map and the meta argument map more than just a link. That's
right.
I think what I would argue for.
Right. I think I disagree with that, but so far it's not a hard disagree. I think there are use cases for making the link, but they would belong more to the computational argument validation. And I do agree that computational argument validation is a bit a separate scope. So that way you totally have a point. But I see your point that modeling equivalence can be a separate domain than modeling the argument structure. Fair enough. And that they would only come together. Yeah, no, I think I can live with that very much.
Yeah, so it could be equivalence could be represented in an argument map and then modeled and discussed in a separate map, and then you just link the two together. In the argument map, it just stands as it is equivalent. If at any one point in the meta argument map where you might have richer modeling, if needed, we can look at that on a case-by-case basis. If that's needed, the outcome of that, let's say if the outcome is it's not equivalent, then you just in the original argument map remove the equivalence and turn them into two claims, for example.
Right. Well, in the cases where the equivalence, non-equivalence has an impact on the argument, it can be a separate mechanism, and I see that.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense to me.
Yes. If there are arguments where, yeah, like you said, it's probably we need to look at examples. If it's an argument where the equivalence or non-equivalence of something is part of the argument, then you're already in more incremental formalization steps. And then the question is, is that something you want in the main argument model or not? And is it at that point still a meta argument even? You could also wonder.
Okay, I think I agree with that basically. So, okay, something I want to discuss today, sorry, I'm going to, where do I put it? No, actually, let's have this here because it's, sorry, this is notes to myself. It's not very, I just want to, I've been playing with an example of analysis. I took basically an abstract from an article a bit arbitrarily. That's a climate change article. And I started breaking it down, like what are the claims, entities, blah, 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 that I would identify in that. So here's an entity, here's another entity based on that one. And I didn't write what's an entity, what's a claim, and I need to be more formal about this, but I'm trying to develop a notation, basically. And these are all nested entities with relationship. This is a claim about the count. here it's interesting because it's a causal relationship between an entity and another. And here, that's a bit, there's a link between, there's a kind of derived link. So just because the numbers are confusing, hydropower allows domestic access to electricity. It's very indirect, but it's still true. So it reduces the number of people without domestic access to electricity.
To make this better readable, you could, instead of having the numbers, like have short identifiers, like names. I think that helps.
The numbers are identifiers.
yeah, but like short human readable identifiers that you don't have to do the lookup all the time.
No, I understand. This was to type faster, basically. But yes, I agree. It's hard to read.
Then before you know it, you have plain language again, right? Because 6 increases 8 would be hydropower increases economic development. So I like this. So this is the more formalized way you're thinking, and that's also the purpose of these Friday calls. I understand that. But the same way that you say you need to think about this like ahead of time because it might impact things, I wonder, how do you see this work incrementally? Like, how do you get here from what is the less formalized form that precedes this one, for example? Have you thought about how to model that?
What I think will happen is, you know, people and or systems, because there are some of that can be automated, right? The entity identification is a solved problem pretty much. So we would have the entities identified automatically. And then basically people making the link, saying, oh, what's the link between this entity and that entity? What's the link between this and this?
But just for example, to save 580 million people in sub-Saharan Africa here requires to say people in one, requires to say count people in two. Without, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Yes, absolutely.
Is this something that's there from the get-go, or can you first just add?
Oh yeah, you could start with this and then decompose it. I agree. Take this as a starting point. And I was going for micro, but yes, it would be perfectly valid to have that as a primary thing, or even start with the big thing and then dig down into the structure.
So it would be interesting for each of these actions to look at the user story part of this. Like, what would that imply? For example, how do you do 5, like count? Is that something you select from a list? Is it can you create new ones? Is it
no, absolutely.
Which things does it apply to? Does it apply to anything, or only countable entities? If you see what I mean.
Totally. Totally. I agree that this is absolutely important and worth doing. I think I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to see what am I going towards, and then I can think about UX.
Okay.
But yes, of course, that's the goal, right? There's a lot of things that are affecting, which are causal links, so that's fine. What is really interesting is here I got epistemic, like this may explain that. So just to go back to the text, because this is numbers and it's obvious, but if you look at the text, climate change impacts are rarely explicitly considered in planning. This may be because blah, blah, blah. So this may be because here it's those aspects, okay, natural variability, and basically it's a long-term effect, like the climate change is long-term. So those are two reasons. And then there's another reason that oh, the planning is around 30 years. So the window where climate change will impact the river flow is outside of the planning window. And that's why climate change is not considered in the planning. And this is interesting because it's not quite, it's between causal and epistemic is what I'm realizing. For me, that's interesting. Those are the reasons why it's not considered in planning, but it's also why we can, why it falls outside of the epistemic window of planning, or it's why we know it's not part of planning. It's causal more than epistemic, but it's got it's a kind of in between. It's epistemic causal, if you will. It's the reason why people don't think about something. No, I'm not taking a break now. Sorry, should do that before the call every time. This I didn't bother to model yet, but I got this far. And here I have, you know, because it came after in the text, I would say we have a first explanation using only it's long term, and and planning is short term. So it's kind of implicit and made explicit later, which I'm sure will happen all the time.
Each of these numbers maps to entities in your diagram, or is this still up?
Some are entities, some are claims, some are.
No, but I mean, by entity, I mean, does it map to a rectangle in your diagram?
Yes.
Your entity diagram.
Yeah.
So when you say 6 increases 8, you know, for example, well, because you didn't list them, right? So one thing that's missing for this to be related directly to your example would be 6 hydropower is, and then you look at the entity diagram. Oh, this is a entity or whatever.
Yes, absolutely. I should distinguish claims and entities in here. There's not that many claims. It's basically whenever there's two entities, but not even. This is still an entity. It's a kind of predicate. And okay, and this is what I wanted to get into. It's the place of variables. We have entities, and when we have an entity, we sometimes have, you know, it's this individual kind of definite article. It's Sub-Saharan Africa is a good example. It's a specific entity. It's this one and not another. People in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's more like any ex-human such that X is in Sub-Saharan Africa. It's a kind of placeholder for a bunch of people. It's not fixed. People come and go, get born and die. So it's a generic container as opposed to an individual. And I'm getting into the difference between a definite and indefinite article here. And sometimes you have anybody with those characteristics, any one person, all the person, or any one entity, all the entities, like basically existential quantifier, universal quantifier, unique existential quantifier. And those are basic entities. Now it's taking the whole weight of propositional calculus, and I'm not crazy about that. But I think that a lot of the questions I ask about, is this the same as that? Is this not the same as that? Are about asking, is there an entity in the symmetric difference? Is there a collection in the symmetric difference? That is, can I define predicates that with existential weight that are in the symmetric difference?
What's the symmetric difference?
If I say okay, for example, if somebody uses greenhouse gas and CO2 interchangeably, and I said no, there's something in greenhouse gas minus CO2, so that's a difference, set difference, symmetric difference. Sorry, it's something that is like in either, but not in the intersection. It's union minus intersection, but here really it's difference that I'm interested in. But because it's because one is a subset of the other, they're interchangeable. But I should have used difference really.
But it's a good example. Like for example, the way the more lightweight argument models would do that is exactly as a claim. You would say, well, greenhouse gases include more than CO2, right?
Yeah.
That would be a claim that then opposes wherever that's
Equivalence
relevant.
of
Yeah, exactly. So, and what you're arguing with formalizing entities more here is that you can express that not just as a claim supporting or opposing another claim. You can actually formalize it as an entity relation of some sort between one claim and another. But my biggest question remains, and you said it yourself, there's not many claims in here. How is does this still relate to an argument map? Because you have a couple here. Like, first of all, it would be interesting to see what are the claims, and if you have an argument map, which I think so far we agree is claims supporting and opposing other claims.
Yeah.
How does that fit in? Like, how would you? You can take number 14, 12 affects 13. Is that a claim?
Yeah.
Or
and those are actually
18.
claims. They're not arguments.
Or 18 could be a claim, right?
That's a question. Which are claims? And like, for example, if 12 affects 13 could be an argument, but now maybe it's well, if we assume that arguments are claims, but then 12, is that a claim? No, it's climate change. So
that's an entity,
I wonder how
clearly.
So I wonder how do the claims fit in?
Okay, so for example, river flow regime affects climate change. So is that a claim or an entity? It's a statement about a causal relation.
No, it's 13 affects 6, so it's
yeah. River flow regime affects
hydropower.
Hydropower contributes to oops, no. It's 6 hydropower. No, these are all claims. It's claims about causal relations, right? There is a causal relation there. I think that the first argument is probably this one. The natural fluctuation of river flow explains why climate change is not considered in planning hydroelectricity. This is because this claim is true, that other claim is true. So that's the first meta claim. That's the first argument here. Now here, there's no counter argument, of course, because it's one position. I mean, you need a contrast, and you probably need more than one document to have a real argument. But this is the first real argument map, sorry, where you have a position. But this is the first support relationship.
So that specific support relationship, what's the intent of formalizing it like this? Like what can you now do in terms of what you hope to achieve?
Yes. Well, basically, it's possible to, well, these are, let's say I had gone a bit further, and okay, well, what are the points of defeasibility, right? Here it's pretty obvious that one reason why it's not considered, it's that the time horizon is smaller than the impact horizon. So one thing to say is, okay, we could increase the time horizon, right? We know that it's part of the reasons why climate change is ignored. So let's change, and that can be a regulation thing. Make the planning with the 50-year time horizon, and suddenly you have to include climate change. And the other thing is the natural fluctuation makes the impact harder to notice. So you need more statistical analysis so that you can take into account fluctuation and smooth them out.
I don't really see how that relates to the extra formalization you did here, especially since 2050, for example, is not modeled as an entity. I'm a bit confused how the points you're making now relate to the formalization.
Oh, good point. 2050, yeah, and that's part of the problem. It's like Tim's issue with whenever we get quantitative, right? It's 2050. It's actually interesting because it falls outside the 30-year horizon, since that paper was a 2019 paper, which also has to be part of the context. The point is that the okay, my formalization is not complete enough. I need to go to dig deeper up to a point. But if you ask, it's like
you mentioned the feasibility. Are you trying to explain how it is more defeasible given that it's mapped out this way? Yeah, then I think that's what I want to hear. But maybe that's not what you're trying to explain.
Okay. I'll tell you why I really bother to do this. It's not about mapping out more. Well, it is incidentally about mapping out more the feasibility, but it's not the real reason. The real reason is that I can connect it to something else. Like if I put hydropower as an entity, I can look for other documents that speak about how climate change impacts river flow regime and look at studies about that because they're explicit entities. And I can say, okay, what do I know about how climate change impacts river flow regime? What do I know about river flow regime variability? What do I know about?
You mentioned hydropower, not river flow regime. So how would you?
Well, it's part of this. Hydropower river flow regime is here, 13.
Yeah.
And so 21, and that's a reason why we don't take into account climate change. It's because the fluctuation makes it hard to notice the impact of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, for example, I could look for analysis of river flow regime. Techniques for analyzing.
What does it mean to look for analysis? So I understand if river flow regime is an entity, you can look for any other things that use 13, let's say.
Yeah.
But like when you say analysis, what does that mean?
Analysis, that's a good question. In the sense, I think it's I could look for anything about predictions of river flow regime because it's part of the.
And how do you model a prediction? Because I mean, if you don't model it, you can't look for it, right?
That's correct. That's correct. It would be an entity prediction of river flow regime. Absolutely. Okay. Prediction of climate change. Prediction of that would have to be modeled. Yes. And it's not there yet. This is work in progress. But you're right.
So the reason is really what I hear is that the main reason is not so much defeasibility. Well, maybe it is. You want to link all the arguments related to a same entity or an action on an entity, if you will, or you want to link together so you can sort of query for all evidence that river flow regime has an impact on X or Y. Or...
Yes, and either supporting or conflicting evidence, right? I mean, I want to know this claim or this argument is being contested and what does contest it, and being able to do that requires being able to map the argument across documents. Same thing with the entity. What else is argued about this entity?
So
if I want
Across documents? Why across documents?
across documents, because I'm expecting to find a lot of this in documents, but across, see, you're thinking, but in a broader context, I would be happy to do it in the CDL, but the CDL doesn't exist yet. This is about how do we build a CDL. I don't have a God-given CDL, so it's like being able to know where it is argued. And then I very much want to have provenance information because it's a way to evaluate the solidity of the arguments, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of outside the scope of argumentation mapping. So
no, it's in the scope of building the argumentation map. And
yeah, I disagree.
Okay, well, how will you build the CDL if you're not doing it from either documents or people asserting, but which are recorded somehow?
I mean, we don't have to, for example, we don't have to model the internet in here. How are you going to build it without the internet, right? It's a question of what matches the purpose and the use, right? The scope. So if the argument is a thing of its own,
yes,
that exists on its own,
where does it come from?
It doesn't exist inside a document. Where does it comes from? Any source possible that can
Those are
generate a
documents.
claim.
Those are documents.
No, it can be your head. It can come out of your head.
Yeah, well,
Right?
I mean, at some point, I took something out of my head, I wrote it down, it became a data object, it's a document. Document in the broadest sense, right?
I mean, it's in a physical book. It came out of a physical book.
It came out of it, that's a document.
Yeah,
Right,
the
sure.
one just has a
But-
different definition of document here.
It came out of a photograph. I mean,
that's a document. A photograph is a document.
Okay, I don't.
Timothy's point is that the whole point of CDL is to make it canonical, like decoupling it from any document and trying to represent what is represented in multiple documents, sources, politicians saying things in speeches, having one canonical form, the decontextualized form, if you will.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is those decontextualized forms always come from contextual forms. They don't exist outside of the contextual form.
And they're transmitted across the internet. And it was written by somebody whose mother gave birth. Yes. We don't have to do all that. We don't, at some point, you're going to have to cut off scope and not recreate the whole universe, right? And I see the value of provenance. I see the value of provenance as being an argument in support of a piece of evidence. Right? In other words, provenance itself is an argument, but the claim itself doesn't need to incorporate all of that stuff, right? For one thing,
Hard disagree there. Hard disagree there. I think the decontextualized claim loses most of its value.
And that is where we break right there. I totally disagree.
Yeah.
Which value does it lose, Matt? Because I'm a bit confused because we did talk before about having both contextualized and decontextualized. So what value is lost from decontextualized?
No. I'm not saying we lose value by decontextualizing. I'm saying we lose value if we totally cut off the decontextualized from its contextualized provenance.
But I think the point is that a decontextualized claim ideally can. A lot of different people can claim that it's being.
Yes, I believe totally in decontextualizing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't decontextualize, but I'm saying the decontextualization should keep the link to the contextualization. Otherwise, it loses value.
But there's multiple. There's not just one. Otherwise, it's not decontextualized. So
say that again.
Exactly.
Say that again.
There's multiple sources in different contexts that all make the same decontextualized claim.
Yes, that's correct.
You cannot link it back to one. But the whole point is that
we'll link it back to many, of course.
Yeah,
but I'm saying if we cut
that's
the
outside.
links,
Yeah.
if we cut the links, we lose value. We lose most of the value.
You don't have to cut the link. As long as those sources can link to the decontextualized CDL claim, you have the link. I think
what I'm saying is, as long as we, well, it's yes and no. As long as we have a backlink, we need to be able to backlink from the decontextualized claim to the contextualized claims. I'm saying if I cannot do that, the decontextualized claims is of hardly any value. I agree that it's absolutely important to have the decontextualized claim.
Yeah, but wait, here's the place where we're talking about value, right? And the value is to humans, right? So when a human cares enough to keep a link, they can say, this is, this is what so-and-so meant by that. Humans are going to create that link when they actually care to make a point about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, I don't want a universal collector of every single origin of a claim. I want people to point that out when it's important to them, and that's it, right?
And what I'm saying is, I cannot think of a case where I look at a claim and not want to know where it comes from.
But you won't.
Socrates is mortal.
I want to know where it comes from. Are we really
going to have to? Do you care?
Yes.
I mean, you only care if. And why do you care?
I want to know why this claim is being made, and in this case it's a claim about logic. It's got a history. It's about formal thinking. I care about formal thinking. No, but the
okay, but one of the
I don't think you're disagreeing, by the way.
No, I think both can also fully exist side by side. So there's two things. When I hear Timothy say it's out of scope for CDL, it depends what you want to do in CDL, but I fully agree it's a different bounded context.
There I agree.
Yeah,
that's not my problem.
And then it's more a question: should CDL also create tool support to collect contextualized origins of and link them to decontextualized claims? But that can exist fully as a separate system. And I also agree that that has a benefit, but maybe not for everyone, because the whole point of CDL is indeed to try to have a more decontextualized debate, I think, and try to have more reusable arguments that are not so much tied to context if it doesn't necessarily depend on it. And you mentioned that you want to see where it comes from, but the whole point of a decontextualized claim is you can't see where it comes from. If you can find it in 6 sources, you can see it has come from 6 sources, but you don't necessarily know which one of the 6 it originally came from, because you should be able to interpret a decontextualized claim by itself, right?
Right, but if I have, if I want to, okay, let's put it this way. Decontextualized claims, when it's something uncontroversial like Socrates is mortal, it's not that, I don't care that much, fair enough then. But the moment it's something controversial that I either want to defend or attack, this is where I care about origin, because I care about the truth. The truth is ambiguous, or at least it's contested. And if it's contested, you want to look at evidence, and then you look at origin, and because it's the evidence is in the origin, it's not in the claim itself.
This is where I fully agree with the bounded context discussion, which is I think evidence and provenance is a separate domain, right? It's something that, yes, we want to nail down that this is exactly the source of that information, and that information is authentic, right? That sort of thing I definitely want to see supported in a debate. My worry is you focus so much on making sure everything's contextualized and everything that we replicate the problems we have in debate today, and we haven't created a tool that clears the table of all these things. What you're trying to do, in essence, if this is to be in the CDL, is bring in all the baggage that the CDL is trying to get rid of, which is, okay, you said all these things because maybe you heard some thought leaders say all these things, and forget, let's remove the bias of who said it and why. Is this what you're trying to say? Is this increasing the temperature of the planet due to human activity or something, right? You want to just nail down a piece of information that isn't going to move out, slip out from under you like a surfboard or a skateboard or something, and anchor the discussion on one little piece that everybody can agree on, because they're not talking about who said it and why they said it.
Okay, let's get back to basics, Tim, because I see what you're saying. You're interested, I don't think you're interested in decontextualizing. I think you're interested in depersonalizing, which is distinct. And it's,
isn't it part of it? I wouldn't say it is. Or, I mean, who said it's one potential context? I would argue, no.
I know. Of course, personalization is part of the context, but what I'm saying is, if you decontextualize too much, you lose the link to the evidence which supports it, and this is why I'm saying,
you don't, because evidence supports it as an argument. It's right there. Right?
Yeah, well,
evidence is debatable.
No, but once again, I'm not done. The problem is, this work that I've started doing is long and painstaking, and writing the evidence links takes time. So what you'll have is most of the time things taken from a document, put into the CDL, and the evidence links may or may not have been carried through. Being able to go back to the original document allows you, if there's a document, allows you to add the missing evidence links because they were not put in the first time, because putting all of them takes forever.
I'm fully up for a focused discussion on evidence. Like, I think that is absolutely in the scope. But I think we should do it concretely, as in, let's take this white paper, let's take this scientific study, or let's take this photo and see all the things that happen around using this to support a claim in a debate, right? And like, we've talked about before, I believe, and this is where this is exactly the moment where I expanded my definition of context, right? Because essentially what you have is an external reference or document, as you say, right? As an entity that has debates around it. Or rather, you have claims.
That's one case, yes.
Yeah, you have claims that point at this external document as an entity. It doesn't really support it, actually, because you make claims about the document, right? You make claims about the document. Yep. This document was written by whatever. This document is a study. The study for this document represents is flawed because blah, right? All these things.
Okay, that's really interesting, because there's two things. There's the often people will cite a reference as supporting an argument, and this is done all the time in academic writing. For example, you say something, then you just give the reference to a study that supports that. And you use the document as support, where really what you mean is that you're using the arguments within the document and the methodology and the data, the result, blah, 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 as support. So there's a kind of metonymy.
Well, that's one way of citing. There's actually many different reasons why people cite, but yeah.
No, of course. But that's one.
In a best case scenario, the easiest way to interpret a reference is, well, that thing is claimed to be true in that document, right? You could look at it as a claim that is stated in the document. And then if you want to understand the support for that claim, there's going to be a lot of different arguments for that claim in the document.
Exactly. I agree totally, Stephen. That's not the only case, but it's at least one case. I think we're fine with that. So, but what I'm saying is, people use the document itself as support, as a kind of synecdoche or metonymy for the claims in the document. And my point about keeping provenance is that, people do this shortcut at first, and really you want to be able to go back to the document, because the structure of the claims, if you want to analyze it, if you want to verify it, you need the structure of the claim, which has not been mapped yet. And you have to have the provenance to understand.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic.
There.
Yeah, I definitely see that, breaking down a document into an argument map of its own. Yeah, I agree with that. And then the idea is this argument map has claims, and these claims can be referenced. And yeah, exactly.
The claims that can be referenced are ideally the decontextualized claims. What you want is if you have one document that cite, I mean, if you write something, for example, in a paper, and you cite one or two papers, what you want is that these two papers all come to the same conclusion that you originally linked to in the first document, right?
Yeah, ideally.
The commonality is the claim. It's not the document, the source doesn't matter. The whole point is that it's a claim that any document in the future can point to come to that conclusion, or its negation, and that's how you link all of these sources together.
Ideally, studies are reporting the same, are supporting or refuting the same claim, right? Yeah. There you need reusability.
And maybe they're supporting it differently, and then it's interesting because if you've refuted one of the documents, that doesn't mean you refuted the other document. But I agree, the decontextualized claim is the point of commonality and the gateway to these different arguments. But this is precisely why I want to keep multiple provenance, so that I can look at all the evidence, because different documents can have different evidence for the claim. But I agree with that. The decontextualized claim is the gateway and the nexus. There, I'm totally with you. I'm not saying decontextualized claim is unimportant.
Right. I think the thing here that needs either more discussion or more kind of thinking on my part, at least, is like, you're right, we are saying the same thing in the essence of like what you're saying is contextualized argument. I see as being a decontextualized argument that one document is working as evidence supporting the scaffolding of this larger debate in lots of different places.
Right.
Right. Right. You could reconstruct the entire debate without any document and come in later with this study and say, on page 35, sentence whatever supports this claim here. Right. Yep. I see that connection is absolutely inside the scope of the canonical debate as well.
Good.
I guess the question is, does that need extra modeling, and why? And I'm not visualizing it yet, other than the usual of, I think we need to see what the modeling is for a document,
yes.
An external reference or something.
Okay, let's get into that a bit. It's true for me, that's been implicit forever. Do I have this nearby? Let me get Kaplan going.
Actually, before you do that, Antoine, because it's still unclear to me. I mean, this was a very interesting discussion, but it's unclear to me how that relates to the example breakdown of all these entities and relationships between them. I don't see the relation to this discussion and the exercise you were doing there.
What I'm saying,
maybe I'm missing something here.
No, there's a valid question, but I thought I answered, but let me get back to it. The point is, when I'm looking at this, here there's a point about climate change and river flow regime, right? And there's an argument about that. What do we know about how climate change affects river flow regime? Where is that treated? Is there something else about that?
So I think you're primarily trying to support use cases of querying for arguments on a more granular level. And
yes,
I mean, yeah, sure, certainly more formalized ways of representing that can help, but you can also do quite a bit by just textual analysis. Look at how Google works, for example.
Wow.
I wonder to which degree you need to bother the user with modeling all of this to this degree to then optimize your queries. Because if the use case is improving queries, I think there are other ways of going around that.
The point is a bit more, okay, I don't think that, do you realize you're green now?
Me?
I don't know if you're green for others.
Doesn't matter.
No. That was my wow, by the way. I do think that what I want to do is precisely to know how a given argument is attacked elsewhere, what are the alternatives and so on. Like what else is argued about hydropower? And this is about knowing what other claims are made about hydropower. So it's not just, it's a bit more than a query. It's a query about argument structure. And I don't think that textual search
I think
gives
Timothy
me...
and I are aligned when it comes to what else is known about hydropower. I think we do have, Timothy wants to have his, please chip in here, Timothy, what do you call it? Your knowledge map
knowledge
or
graph.
Your knowledge graph you link to.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm thinking along the lines of context X or whatever, but the principle is the same. If you're talking about one thing, you refer to that one thing, and that one thing is used in all the different claims. So you know you're talking about the same thing. So exactly. I don't think there's misalignment there, but there's a lot more going on here, right?
Yes, but that's true, because identifying entities is hard, and it's been what I've been talking about all this time, right? Is it the same entity? That's the really hard part of the modeling. And a lot of what I keep trying to push, and that I'm getting pushback on, is I think it's worth, when you want to know what other claims are made about an entity, is it the same entity or just another entity that happens to be referred to by the same words, which is a very frequent case. And
well, that depends what an entity is. I think very loosely defined, we look at an entity indeed as a word with a description, and that doesn't mean that all entities need to have a unique name, right? That's the whole point. You can have the same entity with, a different entity with the same name, and it's a description that then determines what it is. So right. I think, basically speaking, we would just rely on plain text to describe the entity. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, Timothy.
There's two ways to this. Well, here's the difference between the name and description, right? We use plain text to name the entity. We use plain text to describe the entity. The relationship between name and entity is many to many. We hope that the descriptions help to distinguish name collisions. That's kind of Wikipedia disambiguation page, right? It's the same logic. We may not always use a disambiguated name when we reference the entity in text, but we hope to replace that ambiguous name by a disambiguated identifier, so that when we look at claims involving the entity, we don't get all the ambiguous synonyms. And this is what I'm talking about, really.
But that far, I think we all agree that there's a use for that. But that's only number, in your examples here, that's only number 1, 3, maybe 6, 8. It doesn't cover like 2, 4, 5, 9.
No, yeah. This is correct. Here I have, I'm hinting at, or beginning to think about, composite entities and placeholders and variables and quantifiers and predicates. And this is kind of another level. And it's a level I'm being reluctant to engage in, because it has a ridiculous amount of complexity in modeling and disagreement. But on the other hand, I think there's also a huge potential for benefits, and it's especially important when we are dealing with quantifiers, which is something we've been discussing. Like not quantifiers, sorry, quantity, like the whole the 5 case. Okay, it's 580 million. What if it's 200 million? What if the classic example about cost of pandemic shutdown, right? That whole conversation. This is where variables and quantifiers are probably essential, because it is very much the same entity with a different quantity. And we want to be able to unify those for sure.
But it could also be the same claim with a different quantity, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is being able to unify up to a point entities or claims that only vary on quantitative or even some qualitative axis, right? I think it's important to say those are not the same, but they're on a continuum. And that's an important use case.
Yeah, and again, I don't think we disagree there. That's the whole generic specific thing. It's more like how, to which degree do you model that?
Exactly. And what I'm finding is getting into generic specific does get me into predicate calculus.
Why? I understand you can explain it with predicate calculus, but it doesn't explain why you have to model it. Like, what you say, there's a lot of benefits. Like, what are the benefits?
Precisely entity identification. It becomes possible to say whether these entities are the same, not the same, on a continuum, blah, blah, blah. What does it mean to be the entities are the same modulo continuum? It's to say that they're using the same predicates with a quantitative variable. I'm saying I want to model continuum.
So when you say it, yeah, you're saying that like these are the same claim, but they have a different
quantitative variable
here. Yeah.
Yeah, they have they're parametrized.
Well, one of the entities within the claim is parameterized.
Exactly.
Which then results in what use case in argument mapping?
That it's the use case is to be able to look at all the arguments about that parameterized entity independent of the parameter. Like if I'm interested in knowing what are the consequences of 2-degree climate change, I'm also interested at the 1.5-degree climate change consequence because they're also relevant.
Yeah, so I think the way to do that without having to necessarily model entity variable entities would just be to have a more generic claim that doesn't specify the number, and then you have more specific claims that specify a number. It covers the same use case. So I still don't see why you need to go into such detailed mapping. Just
let me see if I can
go ahead, Tim.
Let me try to because I have a different perspective on the usefulness of this. One is to cut down, you know, the what do you call it, the combinatorial explosion, right? And it's a case where you have mutually exclusive claims, right? That's what parameterization serves, is an almost infinite number of possible mutually exclusive claims, and a person should really only believe one, or at least favor one outcome. And you could be split 50-50 down the middle, whatever, but these things should be evident. So, you know, what you would want is a way to, first of all, you know, be able to support one of the options, or support a subset of the options with a single argument. So you have then, you know, these possibilities of range and set type arguments. One thing that you would want to be able to do is take that thing, which you could call the predicate with you know, essentially is the price of gasoline on this day will be X, right? That's a claim, but like with lots of outcomes, but you end up having one that you actually believe. Now, when you have, I know that in the case of a comparison claim, right, you want to have a claim that is A is greater than B, right? And that is a very difficult thing to argue for or against without creating this specific structure that is the price, like the price of gas is X, and the price of what would compete diesel is Y, right? Going forward, the price of diesel will be greater than the price of gas. You say, well, the price of, there's this claim the price of gas will be X, and you've gone and studied everything, and the price of diesel is something else, and you've gone and studied everything, and you've picked your two options. How are you going to structure that debate? You can argue, I think, that the price of gas will be $1 and the price of diesel will be $2, and therefore that thing is true. And somebody else comes up with a totally different combination of outcomes. And so much easier would be, and much more concise would be, to structure the claim A greater than B. And then you separately hold the debates of A and B, and each person then puts their belief on a specific thing. And then their belief on the greater claim, the greater than claim, is automatically derivable based on the other two.
Do people really put their belief in one specific value? I mean, scientists maybe, but that's more a result of the method than whether or not.
No, but then they end up agreeing with. I mean, it's not like this isn't relevant. I mean, I'm not just talking a theoretical thing, because the lockdown is the actual example I was thinking of, right? And
yeah, but take the actual example from Society Library's breakdown of climate change. How many of these numeric arguments are actually in there?
Well, what you get, you don't have an infinite range. What you have are experts that come out with a paper and put a number. And so what you have are the competing, essentially, papers or models, right? And what people will do is put their belief on a specific model. And that model says that the price of X is going to be Y.
Yes.
So you place your agreement.
You agree more with the method or the model than the actual outcome, indeed.
No,
but in the end,
disagree. People, like a lot of climate scientists, will not say this model is right, this model is right, but they're saying with a range of models, and if we look at the prediction range of a bunch of models, we know that the temperature will be between this much and that much, and we know that the impact of this much temperature is likely to be this, and the impact of that much temperature is likely to be that, but of course includes the previous one, right? So there's a very natural quantitative axis here, saying, for example, the 2.5 degree temperature increase includes all the consequence of the smaller temperature increase. That's modeling win. Saying these models are giving this range, these models are giving this range. They will prefer a bunch of models, but they rarely say this one model with this one prediction. They'll give a kind of
right. I agree with that, but that just changes the argument to ranges instead of a specific number. But it's still the same kind of construction of, I believe in this range and that range, and as such, this argument of something is greater than something else should be derivable based on, and it's harder to construct a set of arguments other than in a comparison, other than in that format, I would say.
But
I have a hard stop right now.
Yeah,
I have to go. Yeah.
But those arguments are made.
Good talk.
Good talk. Ciao.
Say it.
Yeah.
Those quantitative arguments are made all the time, or the same with the, listen to the political arguments. They all speak about inflation, economics. No. That's all quantitative.
No, well, I know they mention numbers, but does it make the argument quantitative? That's what I'm not so certain about.
Well, they're not necessarily, it's not about this value or that value. They're all about relative magnitude. This is larger than this is larger than this threshold. If it's larger than this threshold, it includes this one. I'm not sure numbers are the fundamental here. I think inclusion is the fundamental.
Which begs the question, if specific numbers are not a fundamental thing, why should you formalize them? And that's what okay, I still don't really see the benefit of doing that.
Let me tell you why.
The benefit I do see is that you can indeed automate the outcome, because, well, if that is true and that is larger, then you don't need to do the manual calculus. Oh, that is larger, so, well, the conclusion must be true. But that's, again, not really argument mapping. That's more like logic formalization, in my opinion.
Okay, I think the fundamental concept is inclusion, right? This is included in that.
Which is relevant also in argument mapping. I think that's related to the generic specific.
Yeah, but generic specific is a form of inclusion, right?
Yeah, that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if you only model, if you have something that is quantitative, which does happen, and you model it with pure inclusion, well, you have an infinite number of inclusion relations to model. Whereas if you do model it numerically, you can derive that infinity and reduce it to a very simple formula.
But first of all, it's not really infinite, is it? I mean,
it is.
No, it's not. It would be the same as right now when you have systematic review. Here are all the studies that show that it will be greater. It's just a list of all the specific,
yeah, but it's
highly
greater than this point
contextualized
and
models
greater than
that prove
that
a
point
point.
and greater than that point, and there's an infinite number of points.
In theory, yes, but in practice.
In theory, in practice, no.
No, in practice, okay. But what I'm saying is, in practice, it's bit large and subject to combinatorics. There's no reason not to model numbers.
Yeah, I agree. Like the combinatorial explosion is actually a problem.
In what sense will that be a problem?
Combinatorial explosion is always a problem.
No, to achieve what? To achieve what?
To achieve a simpler notion of inclusion. Like also inclusion, and it's not just numbers, right? It's like the whole point that when we do taxonomies, we want transitivity of taxonomic inclusion, because otherwise it's a combinatorial explosion. We don't want to say, you know, Homo is a member of blah, 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 blah. You want to just say Homo is a member of this, Homo is a member of, primate is a member of mammals, and so on, and deduce the rest, because otherwise it's too many bloody relations. Transitivity matters.
I'm not certain it's too much, to be honest. I mean, it's a claim you've made many times before. Right now, we do it just fine like that in plain language. I'm not saying that that's working out brilliantly, but that's what's happening. We're not modeling these ontologies in everyday discussion nowadays. I get the general point, but whenever you model it, there's also the risk that you model it incorrectly. There's also the risk there's disagreement on that modeling, etc.
I think
I get the point of formalizing it. I don't get the point what problem it solves. You automatically want to somehow include arguments from a more specific to the more generic. I think that it's somehow related to that.
Yes.
I think even though if in practical terms, like for this number, you will have like whatever 5, 6 sample points, and for that number you will have 3 sample points, and for the other number you have 10.
Well, in the majority, you will have 1 sample point, right? That's the whole point, that you have a specific number because it's one specific study, one specific model that concluded that specific number. It's typically going to be 1. It's not.
Most studies give a range to start with.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's so not one number, it's a range.
Then general point that's brought up in argumentation is, oh, climate change is a big problem that needs to be addressed soon. And here you have 20, 30, 500 papers that show that general point. I don't see the problem with that. Like, yeah, sure, if you want to somehow unify the underlying model of all of these and you want to create some mathematical thing that represents all of these 500 papers in one model to reach that same conclusion, sure, but is that needed in argument mapping?
No, that's not the point. I see why that would be overreached. That's not the point. The point is, I want to be able to look at all the reasons to believe the, okay, let's look at consequences, right? We believe that the impact will be X, will be, you know, 90% or more population decrease, or 99% or more population decrease. How many studies support that? Well, actually, this is interesting because it's a composite number. You know, it comes from...
What is wrong with just, if that's a claim, then you just list all the studies that support that? Why do you need to formalize it more than that? Because yeah, you're saying, oh, it's a combinatorial nightmare, because then if somebody else says, oh, there's an 80% chance, oh, well, of course, we automatically want to include all the ones that were already listed at the 90%, because now, of course, these also support the 80%, but does it matter? That's, you're introducing a whole lot of complexity to do that fairly simplistic operation. Whereas in the reality of things, even these percentages, who is going to mention 80%? Why did the 90% get mentioned in the first place? If you look at arguments in context, it's usually not about specific numbers. The specific numbers are the evidence for the conclusion you're trying to reach.
Again, disagree. Because of the comparative cost analysis, when you do, and again, Tim's example was brilliant. When you say this will cost more than that, you are looking at comparing specific numbers.
Not necessarily. There's also the ethics underlying it. For some people, it might not matter. And how do you even put, I mean, in a lot of, like that specific equation, it's impossible. You cannot formalize it. The best you can hope to achieve is to have some models, and then indeed you agree or disagree with the models. In the end, it might not even matter, and it boils down to ethics. I mean, it's a nice example in the sense that, yeah, it shows that you can try to put a number on it, but that number relies on so many things.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely true. But it's also true, and I even agree that the number matters less than the order of magnitude, by the way. But I'm saying, even understanding the order of magnitude, it is interesting to see, do these order of magnitude overlap? Are we speaking about the same thing? The whole question about identity, is this a generalization of that, or is this not? Yeah. Is this a totally distinct thing? That's the real question. Identity is the real question. But if you're speaking about range overlap, speaking about identity and non-identity in terms of range overlap versus doing it one range at a time, like, let's put it this way. If we both made that prediction and wanted to know, are we saying the same thing? We'd look at the range to see if it overlaps. We'd go to the numbers. It's the only practical way to see if we agree or disagree. And I don't see why the system shouldn't do the same thing, because otherwise, how?
With a more basic mechanism which we seem to agree on, which is to support generic to specific. I mean, if you can say
okay,
that.
Let's get into generic to specific, because
on a claim level.
What does it mean to say, like, when you have, that's a conversation I tried to start a few days ago and you weren't there. And
but maybe because I'm going to rewatch these and we are over time. So maybe it's, I can rewatch the last 3 meetings, I think. If that's what you talked about.
But I want to leave you, I just tried to raise a question and it didn't fly. So I'd rather restate quickly.
Okay.
What does it mean for something to be a generalization?
For me, okay, you can answer it. It's not a question.
Yeah, it was a rhetorical question, though I'm curious about your version. I'm saying it's always for a given purpose. That means it's always making a claim that certain individual or subsets fall into can be equivalent to a superset, and that this superset is meaningful, because you can always make a superset. You can always make a superset out of anything. The question is the superset meaningful? Does it correspond to, and meaningfulness is always for a given argument, for a given predicate. So generalization, in a way, it's a view of the mind. You're saying, I'm taking these disparate things and I'm saying they actually have something in common. So I'm creating a predicate, and I'm saying this new predicate that unifies them, and maybe parametrized predicate, but this new parametrized predicate that unifies them actually corresponds to is a meaningful category in that, for example, it's pretty much close to the union of those things I united. If it isn't, I'm cheating, or I'm taking a sample, which is fine, but you know, but there's a, so that means whenever we're looking at abstraction, the first thing we're asking is not what are the subsets or sub-elements, it's how do we, on what axis do we want to carve it up to get the coverage? Because there's many such axes in many cases. Go on.
My interpretation is much simpler, because you already mentioned unions, etc. I wouldn't even want to hope to claim that we can find unions. The only thing that I want to support, that I want to formalize, is that something that's more specific than something more generic. And even that, by the way, I'm still looking at how to do. But either way, something that's more specific than a more generic claim is simply included in the more generic claim. So if it's an inclusion principle. It's like there can be multiple specifics that all relate to it's abstraction. I don't know how to put it better. Like in the case of ranges, if you say, well, the value lies between 0 and 100. If you say the value lies between 50 and 60, that one is more specific than between 0 and 100. Right? If one is true, the other one can still be true. I think it, yeah.
The range induces inclusion, and inclusion induces abstraction. What I'm saying is abstraction is distinct from inclusion. Conceptually, I agree that it can be reduced to inclusion. That's totally true. But it is conceptually different than inclusion. You can make arbitrary unions, which is an inclusion relation seen from the other angle, and that's not a good abstraction. So what makes a good useful
But I don't want to
abstraction?
make unions, because it's near impossible to completely formalize a union. I don't want to do that, because language is much more flexible than that. I only want to do the other way around, something being more specific than an abstract one.
Well, as I said, that's just traversing the same relation in the other direction.
But it keeps it open. It never says this is the complete union. It always leaves open more specifics to be added.
You added complete.
Okay, sorry, I thought that was implied by union. I'm not that strong in my math background, as you might know by now. So yeah, then I agree. But for me, that's the only support I want to do, because that allows to do all of these use cases. It allows the querying you want to do.
And I'm saying there's sometimes it will be convenient to have the inclusion relation be a function rather than a materialized relation, because it will be much more economical to do so.
Well, I'd like to see concrete real-world arguments that we want to map that represent that, because I haven't seen them. We've had these discussions a couple of times before, and yeah, sure, you can do it, and yes, it would be a better formalized model, but does it map the argument better, or does it make it more accessible to users? I don't see it. That's the only thing.
No, fair enough. I think it makes the argument more palatable to the machine, to be honest, rather than the user. And I think that also counts in some cases. But
it does. But which use case does a machine need to have the more formalized form for?
Finite resources. That's a use case.
I don't get it. I mean,
well, combinatorial explosion hits against the machine's finite resources.
Yeah, but to do what? What are you calculating? Why are you hitting this? What are you trying to analyze? What are you trying to run on the argument map?
Because humans will not create all the combinatorial explosion samples. That's true. Only computers would.
But does it matter if humans make the argument that it's 90%? That's the only one that needs to be represented. If that's the one that's being discussed right now, does it matter that those are not included in the?
It's extra work for the human, and it's a deterrent to use. If some of them can be deduced from the structure, it's less work for the humans, and it makes the system more usable.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I can agree to that extent, but there's a lot of things you can. I would first and foremost want to see this problem arising in an actual argument mapping tool before implementing it. And since we both believe in incremental formalization, if we want to allow to do it, it would have to be done once a problem arises, right? So if you say, oh, this problem is arising here right now in this argument, let's formalize it more so that we can reduce the burden on the user, then that's the process I want to see. I don't want to start building it even without actually having seen this in practice ever.
Right, but this is something you will see in practice when it's possible also, right? People will do the inclusion things by hand, and the difficult, like if it's not covered by the model, you will not see it happen because you've made it difficult for the problem to arise, right? But the problem, that doesn't mean that the problem is there. No, but you've made it, it doesn't mean that the problem isn't there. It's just that the structure.
No, but the problem would be that there's a claim 90%, 80%, 70%, and that whatever the problem you're trying, that's the problem you're trying to solve. That problem I need to see.
And what I'm saying is, if there's no facility for numbers, you probably won't see the problem happen because people won't bother entering the number. But the fact that you don't see it doesn't mean that the problem isn't there.
But people can enter numbers in claims. Claims are free text.
Yeah, I know, but what I'm saying is, will they do it? They'll do it, but not that often, not as often as they would if the numbers could be.
No, and actually you try to, because I've done a lot of argument mapping, and you actually try to really keep the numbers in the leaves because you're trying to make more canonical claims. So the numbers typically end up as, the numbers don't really matter that much. It's the numbers in the end are the evidence. If you want to support something like evidence, the main way I map it out, I usually just edit at comments at the edge, at the leaves of the whole argument map.
I think we're very hypothetical territory right now, which it basically needs to be tested. I think there's of course the theoretical concerns of combinatorial explosion and better formalization, and the other side of humans will not do it, or like the combinatorial explosion will not happen, and so on. So yeah, I see both sides.
Anyway, I think what's really important is I have a different view of abstraction than just inclusion, and I need to make that more explicit.
Yeah, I would love to hear that if it's different, because I haven't noticed it before.
Abstraction for me is like you can hide details. That's like one core aspect of abstraction for me.
For me, it's more really set theory that something is included in, and that's also why actually some of the discussions that with the Visaris people in real world arguments is like, well, for me, this is a more abstract, what you're saying is included in what I'm trying to say in this more abstract one here. It doesn't make the more abstract one more less meaningful. It simply means that, yes, it might mean what you're saying and some other things, but it's the more abstract, if you will, ambiguous.
So you're basically saying the same as I do. Like it's, yeah.
I'm almost tempted to have a complexity theory answer, saying an abstraction is useful if it has lower complexity than the union of its members.
But in which context? I think it's fully context dependent.
No, the complexity theory, well, I mean, we assume that we have a theory of description here if we can measure complexity. So it's for a given measure of complexity. But
and in argument mapping, I would say that
the idea of complexity theory is you abstract across all possible languages and complexity measures. Of course, you cannot do that. You have to start with one, but you abstract across those you have and choose the lowest complexity.
I think for argument mapping, it boils down to cognitive load then.
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
Oh, also acceptability. I mean, the first premise in informal logic is start with claims that people are willing to accept. If a lot of people are willing to accept a very broad open claim, or that broad open claim is the strongest, most relevant argument you can make in support of another claim, that's one you should use. But if there's that acceptability doesn't exist, then you should use a more specific one, because all that's happening is you're weakening that whole argument in support of another one, because it's not relevant to a lot of people in specific cases. So it all has to do with context and yeah.
No, that is interesting. Why do we say all men are mortal instead of all living beings are mortal? It's a good question. Is it that people believe that less, or because obviously all living beings are mortal is a stronger, more generic argument?
Yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, yeah, because Socrates is a man, right? Yeah, he's also a living being. So yeah, exactly. It's
no, but it's given what you just said about take the broadest one. We're obviously not doing that. We're naturally not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, saying living being actually would be a more canonical form.
Yeah. But we don't, and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Shall we call it a?
Yeah, call it a day. Yeah. I agree.
Ciao, ciao. I will rewatch the other 3 meetings, and then, well, I don't know whether I'll manage by Monday, but I'll try.
Watch it in double speed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I do 1.5 usually.
Yes, I agree. At least. Ciao, ciao.
See you.
Bye.